How often do you ponder the future of our planet in the face of climate change? It's a global question, a universal concern that transcends borders and cultures. Our world is in a state of flux, teetering on a precipice, shaped by the invisible hand of climate change. It's a problem too vast for one nation to shoulder alone. It necessitates a collective effort, an international symphony of solutions. And this symphony began to play its first notes in 1997, when world leaders took a significant step to combat climate change with the Kyoto Protocol. In the heart of Japan, in the city of Kyoto, history was made. It was December of 1997 when representatives from over 180 countries gathered together, united by a shared mission, to combat the looming threat of climate change. This global congregation marked the birth of what we now know as the Kyoto Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol was conceived under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC for short. Its aim was to bind developed nations legally to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. This was an unprecedented step, a first of its kind in the history of international environmental law. Why was this necessary, you may ask? Well, the scientific community had been raising alarms about the rapid increase in the Earth's temperature, largely attributed to man-made greenhouse gases. The consensus was clear: if we continued on the same path, the consequences would be dire. The countries involved, known as Annex I countries, were predominantly developed nations, including the United States, most of Europe, and Japan. They agreed to cut their emissions by an average of 5% below 1990 levels by the period 2008 to 2012. This commitment was significant, as these countries were responsible for the majority of global emissions at the time. But the Kyoto Protocol was more than just an agreement. It was a symbol of global unity, a testament to the power of collective action. It marked a shift in global consciousness, acknowledging that the health of our planet is a shared responsibility. The protocol was not without its flaws and faced its fair share of criticism, yet it was a crucial first step, a necessary push in the right direction. It set the stage for future international agreements, paving the way for more comprehensive and ambitious climate action. Thus, the Kyoto Protocol emerged as a beacon of hope in the fight against climate change. It served as a reminder that when faced with a global threat, we can come together, rise above our differences, and work towards a common goal, a sustainable and resilient future for our planet. The Kyoto Protocol was not just an agreement, it was a tool with specific mechanisms. Let's delve into these innovative mechanisms, each designed to reduce the cost of cutting emissions. First up, we have emissions trading, often dubbed as the carbon market. This mechanism encouraged countries to become more carbon efficient by allowing them to trade emission units. If a country was able to cut its emissions below its target, it could sell the surplus units to countries that had exceeded their targets. This way, the protocol ensured that the global emission target was met, while enabling countries to benefit economically from being environmentally conscious. Next, we have the clean development mechanism. This mechanism was a win-win for both developed and developing countries. It allowed industrialized countries to invest in emission reduction projects in developing countries. Not only did this help the industrialized countries meet their emission targets, but it also supported sustainable development in the developing countries. Last but certainly not least, we have the joint implementation. This mechanism allowed a country to receive emission reduction units when it helped to finance projects that reduced emissions in another country. The key here was cooperation. Countries could work together, share the financial burden, and reap the rewards of a healthier planet. These mechanisms were not just about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, they were about creating a global community that worked together to tackle climate change. They promoted economic growth, fostered international cooperation, and encouraged sustainable development. It's important to remember that the Kyoto Protocol was not a one-size-fits-all solution. It recognized that different countries had different capabilities and responsibilities. It provided flexibility, allowing countries to choose the most cost-effective and suitable ways to reduce their emissions. As we look back, we can see that these mechanisms were groundbreaking. They showed the world that it was possible to combat climate change without hindering economic growth. They laid the foundation for future climate change policies and agreements. These mechanisms provided a flexible and cost-effective approach to combat climate change. The Kyoto Protocol was more than a piece of paper, it sparked a global movement. This historic agreement, signed in the city of Kyoto, Japan in 1997, made tangible strides in the global fight against climate change. One of the most significant impacts of the Kyoto Protocol was the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Participating countries committed to cut their emissions, leading to a significant decrease in the release of harmful gases. For example, the European Union achieved an emission reduction of over 20% between 1997 and 2012. This is equivalent to taking millions of cars off the road each year. The protocol also played a critical role in promoting renewable energy sources. It incentivized countries to invest in technologies such as wind, solar, and hydropower. As a result, we've seen a surge in the use of green energy worldwide, accelerating the transition from fossil fuels. Today, renewable energy is the fastest-growing energy source globally, and it owes part of its success to the groundwork laid by the Kyoto Protocol. However, it's important to acknowledge that the protocol also faced numerous challenges and criticisms. Some argued it didn't go far enough, that the emission reductions were insufficient to combat the rate of global warming. Others pointed out the absence of major emitters like the United States, which didn't ratify the agreement, and developing countries like China and India, which were exempt from the mandatory emission cuts. This lack of universal participation limited the protocol's overall impact. Critics also highlighted the issue of carbon leakage, where businesses moved to countries with less strict emission regulations to avoid compliance costs. This not only undermines the protocol's goals but also can exacerbate economic disparities between nations. Yet, despite these challenges, the Kyoto Protocol was a significant stride in the global fight against climate change. It marked the first time nations came together to legally commit to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It sparked a global conversation on climate change, paving the way for subsequent agreements like the Paris Agreement. The Kyoto Protocol, despite its shortcomings, marked a significant stride in the global fight against climate change. It's a testament to what we can achieve when the world unites for a common cause. And it serves as a reminder that while we've come a long way, the journey to a sustainable future is far from over. The Kyoto Protocol did not just fade into the annals of history, it left a legacy. In the wake of the Kyoto Protocol, the world witnessed the birth of the Paris Agreement in 2015. This successor to the Kyoto Protocol stood on the shoulders of its predecessor, taking lessons and insights from the past to forge a more sustainable future. The Paris Agreement was not a mere continuation of the Kyoto Protocol. It represented a paradigm shift. Unlike the Kyoto Protocol, which set binding targets for industrialized countries only, the Paris Agreement called upon all nations, developed and developing, to do their part in the fight against climate change. This universal participation marked a significant departure from the Kyoto Protocol, yet it was the Kyoto Protocol that paved the path for this evolution in international cooperation. The Kyoto Protocol demonstrated the power and potential of global collaboration in addressing climate change. It set a precedent, showing the world that it was possible to unite under a common cause, despite the varied economic and social landscapes of different nations. It gave us a framework, a starting point, that the Paris Agreement could build upon. The Kyoto Protocol also catalyzed the development of innovative mechanisms to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, such as carbon trading. These mechanisms have been expanded and refined under the Paris Agreement, showcasing the enduring impact of the Kyoto Protocol. But perhaps the most profound legacy of the Kyoto Protocol is the shift in global consciousness it helped to initiate. It brought climate change to the forefront of international discourse, sparking conversations and actions that continue to this day. The Kyoto Protocol, a monumental step in the climate change journey, continues to inspire and guide global actions. So the next time you ponder about the future of our planet, remember the Kyoto Protocol. Remember the power of international cooperation in making a difference.